Dinosaurs, possibly one of the most ever-changing subjects in the world. The way we see them, how they act and sound, has changed dramatically over a rather short period of time, especially considering how long ago they lived and how little we've known them. These alien but oddly familiar reptiles would have many forms of representation throughout the years, but none as popular as Jurassic Park, which capitalized on this jolt of energy in terms of interest towards dinosaurs in the best way, with interesting characters and discussion, but leaving plenty of room for action scenes along with some horror. Now skip a few years to 1997 with the new sequel to The Lost World Jurassic Park, and despite the insane hype, it could never manage to recapture the wonder the first film could. No matter how many records it could set until James Cameron nuked them into oblivion the same year, it would never be as good as the first. And eventually hype died down for the series, and dinosaurs became something you knew about but weren't as fascinated with. During this time, a bizarre film was being made, with several variations of the script going around and having to write stuff on the dot, something the MCU would actually do 7 years later with Iron Man, the first in the actual universe. However, that movie seemed to be the more cohesive one, as the sequel would be plagued with mountains of production problems and a bloated budget. This hard work didn't even pay off too well, as it wound up being the lowest grossing of the series even to this date, and remains a sequel not too many revisit, and the ones who do proclaim it to be a forgettable dino slasher film if anything. But since the series has ended, and on such a low note too, I thought I would take a look back and see if it's truly a film best left lost to time. And I thought the best way to do this was approach like the film itself, take scrapped ideas and reassemble them, and by this I mean doing a video in segments. I've only done one at a time, and scrapped the idea of a few others, just to spice things up a bit. Now, it may seem like I'm repeating myself, as I've already talked about the reception to The Lost World, but you're wrong. In order to understand why certain choices were done and why this film ended up the way it was, we have to go deeper than, oh yeah, the sequel came out and these people liked it, and dinosaurs got boring, and there's a bunch of different scripts written, because it sounds like every other franchise when it hits a bump in the road. What we need to know are the specifics of the reaction to The Lost World, and not just from the general audience, but the creators themselves, and what those different scripts entailed, and how the production was such a mess in order to get better context, and thus, this important bit of info just became a bit more important to you. Now let's proceed. Despite The Lost World going all out on all fronts, such as action, number of characters and deaths, scale, music, tone, commercials, trailers, toys, and more, basically everything, it wasn't as big of a hit as the first, and the reason for this can be distilled into 3 words: spectacle over character. Whereas the first had a great balance of interesting characters discussing the themes and ideas in a natural way that builds characters, and horrifying intense action that left you on the edge of your seat, The Lost World only half attempted that, or at least half did that. See, for its first act or so, it actually had a decent setup. Good characters with some good, if light action that just worked beautifully. Then the camp gets destroyed because of the main characters, which causes a domino effect of non-stop action without any of the payoff that the first did so well. Oh, and it also doesn't help that start the trend of the so-called good guys causing more collateral damage than the so-called bad guys. Something that this franchise would never ever recover from. And so this all just added up to a fun but forgettable and pale continuation of such a great story. And this was felt all throughout the general audience. Even if you don't believe me, look at the box office. It made around $300 million less than the first total. This clearly had an effect on the audience as the word spread around, because despite a great opening that smashed records like earlier said, it quickly dwindled and dwindled until making a measly $229 million compared to the original's $357 million. From the original run, including the re-releases, add up to $404 million for a combined total of $1.109 billion. So yeah, not good. Spielberg would later go on to call this film a big silent war movie, effectively echoing the same feelings audiences had. He felt like his distaste for sequels in general, and his overconfidence from the first film's critical and financial success, set him up for failure. Michael Crichton himself was also likely not happy, already not being a fan of sequels and then being pressured to write one and have the movie take almost nothing from it, likely left a sour taste in his mouth, but I don't know. But the important thing to note was that neither was super interested in another Jurassic Park book or movie, especially Spielberg, as he was tired and busy with other projects and didn't exactly have the most fun time making the first, as he was making Schindler's List as well, and they would only stay briefly to come up with some ideas. One person who was not busy, however, was Joe Johnston, director of films from your childhood like The Rocketeer, the original Jumanji, and Captain America the First Avenger. So hey, another MCU movie. It expressed interest in directing a Jurassic Park film since the first, but Spielberg wanted to do The Lost World, so by the time the third film was in the early stages, he called Joe and asked if he still wanted to do it, with him obviously saying yes. And thus, pre-production was off, which only gets more complicated and worse.
I think that it's very subtly different in a fundamental way. I mean, does that make any sense at all? No. But,
Films usually have different ideas when originally being conceived, and this one is no different in that basic idea, but to the extent this film went through is generally rare, as different plots will be thought of with other problems and knots to untangle. One of the ideas Spielberg had thought of before he left was Alan Grant, who was famously not in the Lost World, living on Isla Sorna having snuck in. However, Johnson didn't like it as he felt Alan Grant had no reason to be on the island considering their first film's events, which to me makes sense. I'm interested to see what that idea entailed, but yeah, it won't make sense for this dude to come back on a different island and dangerous dinosaurs, especially after hearing the events of the Lost World and how even the mainland got affected by it. Now, for these next scripts, I'm going to try to do my best to go in order and cover as much as possible, though it is a bit hard to find information, but just like my Cloverfield video, life finds a way, or something like that. After Crichton and Spielberg left to do their shtick, one of the earliest people hired to do a draft was Craig Rosenberg, and his draft is particularly interesting. His idea was a group of teenagers being stranded on Isla Sorna and having to fight their way out, and it would include an aquatic reptile named Kronosaurus, along with the scene of them evading raptors on motorcycles like the Lost World book. Why this is so interesting is because later on, a 5-season-long show called Camp Cretaceous would come up with a very similar plot. It seems that while they never went with this specific idea for the movie, they reused it for the animated show. However, this draft would not remain untouched for long as Peter Buchman was hired to do some rewrites, and this is where the film becomes a lot more complicated. The opening would be similar in a way to what we got in the actual film, with cold open killing, but there would be likely more as it's spreading throughout the mainland and eventually the world, or at least everyone presumes so. A couple would go missing on an island while Alan Grant would be searching for donors for a raptor research substation to be built on Isla Sorna, continuing the idea of Grant wanting to go on these dinosaur islands. There's also a representative of the U.S. State Department, Harlan Finch, who will later be transformed into Mark in a way, but both are in the State Department and remain on the mainland throughout the duration of the film. Yet Harlan would be a bigger character as after meeting an environmentalist, Simone Garcia, would talk to Alan Grant and get him to be a part of some hearing relating to sovereignty rights regarding Isla Sorna under the U.S., which would in turn allow him to build a substation on the island and have unlimited access to it in terms of research. Alan Grant would also be accompanied by a graduate student, Billy Hume, who would later become Billy Brennan for the sake of alliteration, I guess. Now, one important thing to note is, while we see Alan asking for donors, some people in his audience would be actual characters, namely wealthy businessman Paul Roby, later transformed into Paul Kirby in the final film, with his dinosaur-obsessed 12-year-old son, Miles Roby. One other person there would have been Susan Brentworth, who was in a relationship with Paul Roby but neglected to tell his son because his mother died in a car crash 3 years ago with Paul at the wheel. Paul would get Alan to take the three on a sightseeing tour on Isla Sorna with the promise of a huge donation towards the Raptor Research Substation with a pilot Udesky and bodyguard Cooper. They would get onto the island, but eventually shit would go down because of a Spinosaurus. It would kill the T-Rex after a fight and kill Udesky instead of Cooper and Nash. Billy would steal some eggs, leading to them tracking down the remaining 6 humans, if I've counted correctly, in the lab in a much more complex order of events that will last the night, leading into a motorcycle chase scene where Cooper dies after selflessly protecting Miles. Billy would also later die due to the pteranodons in the aviary cage, much like in the film, except not really, but we'll get to that. The film will also play it presumably a bit similar until the fighter jets come in to bomb the island to smithereens, but not before finding Paul Roby and rescuing the survivors. Bar Alan Grant as he would stay behind and maybe get blown the fuck up, or not. I don't know. This explosive ending would lead to the script getting the name Jurassic Park Extinction, those came for being too vague and or definitive. There would be some back and forth with the mainland throughout the film, and the reveal that Pteranodons being the killer would lead to a different ending with the military being attacked by Pteranodons, but they end up escaping. As you can tell, this one is similar to the version we actually got in the film, but is a lot more heavy on the plot, just like the first two. However, despite going through the whole casting process and bringing back some of the original actors, and even building some sets and practical effects, 5 weeks before shooting, Johnson and apparently Spielberg, who was still hanging around, rejected the script in favor of a much less complicated rescue mission movie. This is kind of confusing when you take into account how plot-heavy the first two were and how they did take a bit for the main characters to get into danger. Even the second one, despite being a bit faster paced, took around 44 to 45 minutes for the first big action scene. Plus, it was David Coop, one of the writers of both Jurassic Park movies up until this point, that suggested this, maybe taking criticism for how overstuffed The Lost World was to an extent. But they still spent already $18 million on the script, however, so that's why this film feels so disorganized. They just ended up taking scenes from both the first and second draft and trying to make a movie out of it while keeping it simple. This came out of the cost, as the film was mainly just action, and thus Alexander Payne and Jim Taylor, yes, those guys, were hired in 2000 to do a rewrite of the script. They weren't huge fans of the series, but didn't know about the premise and liked it, and ended up watching the two and contributing a draft that added a lot more character and story to the initial, much more slim script that felt like a roller coaster. Though none of this matters, as the final version is still the exact same as before, with the two having little bearing on the final script, despite receiving writing credits. Now, with all that out of the way, it seems like it's only smooth sailing from here, right? Nope. While it wasn't as bad as the scripting process, all those rewrites leading up to an unfinished script didn't help. Like Iron Man, they had to be writing pages on the go while they were shooting, leading into days where only half a page got shot or maybe even less, like an eighth. The actors themselves even criticize the situation, with Macy saying, quote, "The script has been evolving and being rewritten as we go, and what you want to say is, who launched a $100 million ship without a rudder, and who's getting fired for this? But that's the way it goes. That's the way they make these movies. Big deal. I think somebody should be shot, but I'm not in charge." End quote. So, yeah, not good. Other actors like Alessandra Nivola criticized how much of a nothing character he played, and Taylor Leone would remark on how most of her makeup was tied to the actual bruises she would get. It was the most physically demanding one of them all, at least up until that point. But besides that, filming went mostly as schedule. Speaking of schedule, we gotta actually talk about the plot of the movie. Good lord, we've been here a decent amount of time already, and we're just getting into the actual film. The film begins with a kid named Eric going with a man named Ben Hildebrand on a parasailing trip, with it being called Dinosaurs, which I like. A nice play on words. The boat gets into some choppy water, with the two sailing the boat being killed by plot convenience. I mean, that's the best answer. We're not going with the Pteranodons because they're locked in the cage. That's a different script. And the ones from the end of the Lost World that were actually free are different ones and gone, I guess. They just vanished into thin air. Or the writers forgot about them, because, there wasn't a script. The boat crashes with the two parasailing into the dangers of Isla Sorna as we cut to Alan, who's not together with Ellie but is alone, as we all know by now, but don't pay too much attention because by the end of the franchise, it'll be like it never happened, because why not? Ellie's husband works for the State Department, like I said earlier, and that's really the only important thing about him, and Alan and Ellie reminisce about being nearly killed by raptors. He leaves as he goes to talk about his research, much like in one of the earlier scripts, for donations, but gets barely any interaction. He goes back to his dig site where Billy is there as they get approached by Eric Kirby, who along with his wife Amanda Kirby are looking to get a sightseeing tour of Isla Sorna in exchange for some big bucks. Alan reluctantly agrees as they set off with some others hired to help. Udesky, Nash, and Cooper, who met the Kirbys through their church and are obviously going to die in like 20 minutes. Kind of. They get into the island and goof around.
What's a bad idea?
Before Mr. Spinosaurus shows up, killing Cooper and wrecking the plane leading to them crashing. Shit gets thrown around by a mostly off-camera Spinosaurus, weirdly. This cost $90 million to make, wouldn't expect that, as they roll around having a good old time and Nash brutally dies. See what I said about them dying pretty early? They eventually run away and straight into the T-Rex, who chases them. See what I mean about this being a roller coaster? There's a whole lot of running from place to place to set piece quickly. To the Spinosaurus, as they find a scene everyone remembers but will get back to soon. Believe me, we'll talk about it. They get out of here and find out the Kirbys aren't who they say they are. They're divorced, with Ben being Amanda's new lover, and them being rich is just a complete lie. I mean, clearly, have you guys ever seen Shameless? Oh wait, no, that wouldn't come out for a couple years, and it's in a different universe. Whoops. Anyways, they walk around before finding Ben's dead body. What he died from is another mystery. You'll notice that's a common theme throughout this movie. They come across a raptor nest, or more so several of them, as Billy very obviously steals some. Two specifically. They walk around some more before finding an old InGen compound. No, not the one in the Lost World. Remember, the script was being written on the go. They don't have time to remember all that. Not even being sarcastic, that's probably why. I mean, they find a broken car, so you think it'd be, because that part in the Lost World, but no. It's just a different broken car with a broken window and a different compound lab area. Well, there wasn't a lab in the Lost World, but you know what I mean. Different area that looks incredibly similar. They find some embryos in a very weird but beautiful scene in an odd way. I think the music helps. Amanda finds a raptor, more so the raptor finds her, as they get chased around and out of the compound before seeing some herbivores. Finally! I know you could see them earlier as Alan was trying to be a guide, but now they're actually contributing to the scene and now they're gone. It's just the raptors again. With their very cool design as they hunt down Udesky and eventually kill him after trying to lure the others with a trap. Alan gets cornered before meeting Eric, or more so being saved by him, as they talk about how he survived. By that, I mean him giving a very vague explanation. Oh, and he has T-Rex pee. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, okay. They eventually all meet up after seeing the boat, and as they all reunite, the script realizes the Spinosaurus has been gone in the film for about half an hour. Tries to give them their phone Paul handed to Nash, but they all get scared and thus run away from him, through a gate that shouldn't really exist now, but okay. They get into a shelter and realize what Billy was very obviously doing, stealing eggs. As such, Alan Grant shits on him, not literally, as they go down to the steps and into the aviary cage in the best scene in this film and one of the best in the franchise. They get chased around before Billy heroically sacrifices himself, with him totally dying. Totally. They get in the boat after unintentionally leaving the door unlocked, while Eric and Alan talk some more before seeing some more herbivores in the forest. Wow, look at this cool dinosaurs being so cool moment. They eventually continue forward into the night as the Spinosaurus appears in a Jaws reference and messes up their boat, but gets scared away by some fire, which, to be fair, makes sense. They all decide to walk on the land to somewhere, as they get cornered by the raptors, who, yeah, were in this film for like 2 scenes, but really just 1 scene lengthened maximum. They want their baby back, and Amanda decides, sure, why not, and gives them back the eggs as they leave after Alan Grant butchers their language with his thick Australian accent. Australian. Is that even it? Whatever. Helicopters appear out of nowhere because Mark works for the State Department, like I said earlier, and Alan called Ellie about where they were. Nice. Convenient, because they had no real way of getting off the island except for that. They all get saved, including Billy, who somehow survived, and got Alan Grant's hat back, because, yeah, it got lost or something. I legitimately forget when it got lost, but I guess somewhere during the Pterosaur sequence, or Pteranodon, whatever. The film ends with the Pteranodons from earlier flying around, with no extra damage being done except to the franchise. So I guess it's Pteranodons? Whatever, the franchise is fucked for like 14 years. As you could probably tell, I've skimmed over a lot of the character stuff. That's because there really isn't any. Like you heard earlier, there were other drafts with more character and story in it, and I'm curious to know what those would have entailed as I can't find anything on it. So we're left with quite barren characters for the most part. I mean, the bodyguards are cool, I guess. Nash gets a pretty cool death, and same with Cooper. I guess Udesky was kind of nice. He had some funny lines. There's just not much. Hell, Billy probably had less, coming across as a leftover sidekick from the Lost World, always bringing danger to the main group by doing stupid shit. He's just this dude who's friends with Alan, who's just there, kind of acting like a child by not thinking at all. Though I bet that's not a character trait, but rather a result of a lack of a proper script, and just the need to move along from the next action sequence, so yeah, shit just doesn't make sense. Alan and the Kirbys are the only ones that stand out, as Alan is similar enough to Ian in the Lost World, but different enough to be unique. See, his life wasn't fucked over because he talked about the events of the first film, and thus his cynicism is just from a failure to continue doing his life's work and be successful. He managed to get out mostly unscathed. He doesn't even seem that scared by the raptors, unlike Ellie, still having that wonder about them, which may or may not contradict part of his arc in the first film, but hey, it only gets worse the further we go into the series. Cherish what we have now. But even when he's being attacked by them, he seems almost entranced by them at times, noting how they call for help among other things, which transitions nicely over into his relationship with Eric Kirby, as he isn't as anxious or annoyed as Ian is from the Lost World, and still wants to talk about dinosaurs. It's nice to get a different type of character in what would otherwise be a by-the-books type film. Eric is also a pretty good character, I guess, nothing much to him, but he's likable and not annoying. He manages to handle himself and has some funny and or memorable lines, just not a lot though. Him and Alan do have a good relationship though, unlike the other Kirbys. Yeah, it's time to talk about these two characters. One's typically regarded as the worst main characters of any of the films. Are they though? Nah, not really. I mean, sure, they're annoying and rarely ever shut up, but that's the point of a character arc and people seem to forget that. They're annoying as shit but change into better and capable people. If anything, it seems realistic if you have this average middle-class-ish family that was brought to a dinosaur island trying to find their son, who's obviously got a better hold on things than them, and constantly bicker but over time get better. Still doesn't make the viewing experience any better though. Now, since I've shown you clips of this island in this film, and since you've probably seen the only other film that takes place on Isla Sorna, you've probably noticed something off with the clips. Something about the terrain is different. Oh yeah, everything. Whereas the Lost World is more California redwood trees type, this is a lot more tropical Hawaiian-esque type in terms of location. This I don't really have an explanation for. I don't know why they had to make very obviously different looking sets other than a lack of a script. Geez, that one thing really screwed over everything. But I guess since the island is pretty big, significantly bigger than Nublar, like 2-3 times bigger, they thought nobody would notice or it would make sense. It either way has the unintended effect of being very lazy, like they couldn't just make a new island, a site sea of sorts, instead of a very obviously different looking island. Hell, it doesn't even follow continuity with a hurricane that wiped out all the fences and gates in the Lost World, as there is one in this film like I mentioned before. It doesn't make any sense. Guys, it's not that hard to follow the canon and lore in the series. There's only 2 films and they're not Call of Duty Zombies level of complex, just above a regular blockbuster level of complex. It's not that hard. Every place in this film feels oddly similar to places we saw before, but nope, it's someplace different. Like, I understand showing new places, I get that, and even like that. It means you have somewhat of reason to exist and show cool new places for cool new action scenes. But not this. Like, the ancient compound was very obviously a reference to the village area in the Lost World, but heaven forbid we actually see it. All it does is make you guys seem very lazy and dumb. Hell, the island itself seems like a ride, vacant in areas where a scare or effect won't pop up. Rarely are there just dinosaurs in the background doing their shtick. Further adding to this effect, it's just vacant in most areas. Except for a couple scenes. It's no wonder people constantly compare to Ride. It's way too fast to actually get a sense of the island and the terrain. By the time you do, there's another new canon-breaking place that exists that shouldn't, or you're at the end of the film facing off some dinosaurs. Speaking of dinosaurs, let's talk about them, and how they're actually pretty cool. Editor's note, I just realized there's a mic pop, but since recording this thing was such a fucking tedious process, I don't feel like doing the whole thing over again, even though it's just like a 2-3 minute clip individually. Still so annoying. Yeah, I hope it didn't ruin that much. So we all know the Spinosaurus, how it's this big bad dinosaur that constantly shows up throughout the movie and chases after the heroes relentlessly. Well, what if I told you that's wrong, and that it only shows up for about 3 minutes, just about 4, yet somehow it's the most memorable part of this entire movie and part of the reason I made this video in the first place. Now at first glance it seems like this dinosaur is just a slasher villain, but after looking through some analytical glasses it becomes obvious it's still a slasher villain. Yet somehow this dinosaur just entranced me. I don't know if it's because of the design or how much longer it seemed to be in the film that made it cool, or maybe it's the fact that it casually brushes off a direct hit to the spine from a plane, only to clap a T-Rex in a battle that's less than a minute long, or maybe it's the fact that it's paced so terribly. See, this dinosaur technically has about 3 minutes and 46 seconds and about 5 seconds of screen time, but 3 of those scenes in about 1 minute and 40 seconds, nearly 41, are within the first 28 minutes of the movie, meaning it only has 2 scenes throughout the rest of the film, and while it makes up for it by destroying everything it comes into contact with, well, almost everything, it still feels like it was painfully underutilized and underdeveloped. Most of its screen time is either the fight with the T-Rex or the ending where it destroys a boat. In fact, the ending boat thing takes up probably like almost half its screen time. It doesn't have much of a personality besides chasing after these folks any chance it gets, yet it doesn't show up that much. It's not like there's interesting dialogue to back up those short 3 minutes and 46 seconds, beyond the fact that this thing was an illegal creation, which is only hinted at in the movie and explored in the DBG and other outside sources, which by the way, the DBG's gone now, so yeah, that's another way to characterize it that's just gone. Every aspect of its existence is a pinnacle of greed and unchecked power, leading to this monster being left to scavenge and mess around with the island. Yet, at the same time, it seems like the herbivores we see aren't affected, like they've learned to deal with it, or likely the writers didn't have time to write anything like that or develop that new idea. It was just a new dinosaur that wasn't around during the Lost World, planted here just for this dino slasher movie to exist. But maybe that's what makes me so infatuated with it. It doesn't really exist outside those few minutes. The characters don't even talk about it that much. It doesn't really show up until Season 4 and Season 5 of Camp Cretaceous, and even then, it just does the same thing. Its existence is as shadowy and confusing as its goal, just there to hunt and do whatever after. It shouldn't have existed, but it does. And it's here to take its anger out on anyone it comes into contact with. It just sucks how little time and development it got. However, something of note is how, as a result of this monster being here, it makes the film almost as water-based as Jaws, and that's why there's so much of the film is tropical and in rivers. Okay, what other dinosaurs do we, or I guess just me, but you can hear me, have to talk about? Oh yeah, the raptors. Oh wait, the raptors are so cool! One thing I've noticed is how they first appear 38, nearly 39 minutes in, almost halfway in as a matter of fact, and it's in the background running. From this we can gather they are fast and have a plan, or can at least make plans. And this is proven 2 minutes later when we see one pretending to be an embryo. Reading that sentence out loud is so bizarre. And chasing the cats and even pushing on the doors in a pretty human way. It's clear that the most intelligent versions of velociraptors at this point in the franchise, but not overly intelligent and not humanized in a way that ruins any tension, unlike some later movies in the series. They also probably have the best design of them all. While it's weird that the tiger-striped raptors from the Lost World Jurassic Park are just gone from this movie, making this feel even less connected to that sequel, I do love these replacements more because of how freakish and eerie they look. They have this weird lizard design and have a really nice set of colors without being too over the top, something the series actually does pretty well. Their quills are also nice, showing how the writers and people working this film paid attention to the new studies coming out and added them in without completely changing their design. They, just like the Spinosaurus, are constantly after the humans, but when learning that Billy stole their eggs, it puts into question whether they were just attacking them because of that. Because, they only show up after Billy steals them. Before then, they are never present, only the nest is. However, because of this film's production troubles, I can't tell whether that was an intentional choice or not. Despite this, they have a great scene killing off Udesky, who is actually a pretty likable character, and setting up a pretty messed up trap. However, just like the Spinosaurus and Voss from Far Cry 3, that means they are barely in the final product and just fuck off until the end, only showing up to get their eggs and reinforce that every movie will include a raptor in some way, no matter how poorly paced it is. Even if you want to say they're in it for longer than 2 scenes but actually around 4, I guess you're right. It's just that, like the Spinosaurus, 3 of those scenes are right after one another. It's the same if you look at Movie Clips' official channel, 3 clips of a Spinosaurus doing its cool shit, then they just run to the raptors doing their cool shtick, have them appear once or twice and add another dino, and now the movie's done. It just doesn't feel cohesive and connective. It just feels like they have a dinosaur ready to move along the plot and kill someone off to keep it interesting because they blew their load with all the cool stuff they do really early on. Most of the deaths are within the first 30 minutes as well. The Spinosaurus fight and most of the scenes are also within the first 30 minutes. The twist with the Kirby's kidnapping Grant and maybe Billy is within that time frame as well. And so is the plane being destroyed. I just wish they spread it out a bit more. Oh, and the other dinos are cool as well. I mean, the Brachiosaurus looked like it killed someone, but yeah, apart from that, they're cool. Pretty realistic and nice designs along with their color schemes. Alright, here we are. The reason some of you may have clicked on this video, sorry it took so long, but hopefully this is worth the wait. This is the infamous fight that got quite the reaction that, like most things in this movie, was actually pretty short. Less than a minute to be exact-ish, and led to this series mostly forgetting or sidelining its existence because of the harsh reaction.
Honestly, I want to shove my cock in your ear and let it come out of your belly button, you. Oh my god!
Many people grew to love the T-Rex and be amazed by it. This formidable beast was so interesting and scary to people. So to see it be killed in such a short time by a new dinosaur that realistically shouldn't have been able to would have hurt some fans and did. However, this isn't the same T-Rex from before, or really any of them to be exact. See, because this is such a different part of the island, it's possible this is just a different but similar looking T-Rex with a very cool bright green look to it, just like the ones from the Lost World, just even brighter. And this is especially true since the parents would likely steer on their child, as not many others, if any, of their kind were on the island. Yes, I know there's a report on the DPG or somewhere before it got taken down that said there's around 6, but even that's not that many, and since at most you see around 4 separate ones, I'm just going to assume they would stay together. You don't really see any other T-Rexes just going about. Either that or because he's had no script. Alright, enough with that. Everyone knows that by now. This movie got screwed up by the lack of a proper script. Need to stop repeating myself. Stop adding this video out. Back to the movie. Things get muddier when you watch Jurassic World Dominion and its ending, with the 2 parent T-Rexes without their child. So is this actually their child? And did the writers change that because of the poor response? Or are these movies just badly written and the fans have to do all the dirty work for them, connecting all the dots? Who knows? They look similar to the parent ones, but it's hard to tell. The important thing is that the T-Rex was dead and Jack Horner liked it. He always thought they were scavengers anyways and talked to people to get on board to kill this fucker once and for all, replacing with what he thought was a bigger and better dinosaur. The fight originally had some practical effects for them to use in it, but the Spinosaurus animatronic was so strong it decapitated it, probably making Jack Horner even happier. So without a practical T-Rex, they ended up just making the entire fight CGI, which is probably why it's so quick too. They just get a couple bites and tail whips in before the Spinosaurus just destroys the T-Rex and claps it. The original version... Now, why'd I say that? Why'd I say claps it? That's... The original version of the fight would have had the neck of the T-Rex being messed up and absolutely ripped apart, but it would have been longer and bloodier, with blood coming from the neck of the T-Rex, and some coming out when it got kicked by the Spinosaurus and onto Alan Grant. Needless to say, it would have been a bloody fight, and while we ended up with something still pretty cool, it's a shame we could have had something cooler. Alright, I've talked about this movie enough. I'm tired of it. Kinda. This series would just end up getting messed with because of this film doing so poorly. Nobody really wanted to continue with where the series was heading off to, and it's evident by how much of a soft reboot Jurassic World is and how it barely connects to the last 2. This film wasn't horrible. It was just at the end of the line in terms of the public's interest. That stuff just changes, man or woman watching this. It's just an unfortunate case of that. This film wasn't good, but wasn't bad. Just in the middle was a dying film and a dying, basically dead franchise. Nobody knew where to go with it, and many ideas just floated around for years until Jurassic World finally came out almost 14 years later, because this one came out in July and that one came out in June, the latest release date of any of them. It just got left out to be an unfortunate byproduct of the times and shifting interests. It remains a mostly forgotten film besides a few aspects, but really, it kinda deserves it. In a way, I've been kinda doing too much work for this movie, making it seem almost more intelligent than it really is. It's just a forgettable dino slash film with a couple fun elements and a couple things that are slightly smart. It's just a shame those elements never tied together and the series never recovered from it, no matter how hard they try to convince you otherwise. Hope you enjoyed. You can like and subscribe and help to interact with the algorithm by commenting and helping this video out. You can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok, where I'm pretty active on. I'm going to try to start uploading every week or so to be a little bit more consistent, so it doesn't just kind of come across as like I don't really care or anything like that. But I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.